All right, thank you, Peter. I just want to say thanks to you for your great advocacy over the years. You've been a great teammate to us in the nuclear enterprise. I can't say thanks enough to you for all the things you've done for us. I do want to take a chance here as well to thank the Mitchell Institute. I want to say thanks to the Cyber Innovation Center and to Louisiana Tech Research Institute, all three great partners of this command, and I certainly appreciate taking the time to host this symposium. I'm happy to have this chance to talk about deterrence and the triad, and you know, I would be clear here. I'd like to take the opportunity that if I was doing this 2 years ago, I would probably say it's good to talk about the triad and deterrence, even in the current world situation. Now in 2020, I will tell you, I say, especially in this current world situation. I believe it's incredibly important. I think academia and the think tanks have to embrace some thought here, and I believe it's really important that we don't let these issues really get swept up into ideologies or into political transitions between administrations, because this is really about the facts on the ground. This is a problem for the nation. It's a problem for the planet. This is not simply a question of whether you're for or against nuclear weapons. That really isn't an option anymore. I think we'll have to step back and take an honest look at what we're up against going around the world. The world has changed significantly in the past decade. I would say that the rate of change has actually accelerated in this last year. And I would be one of the first to tell you that even in the last 6 months, it has changed my thinking. And that might catch you by surprise, but what I've seen happen here recently has only bolstered and probably created more concerns, and I'd like to share some of those with you today. Obviously, one of the big changes that's happened to this country and to this planet is the COVID reality. Otherwise, I would be with you in person. I'm learning to speak to cameras and a few number of people, or to do Zoom sessions, but nonetheless, we're operating in this environment in a different way. But I think when you consider the global pandemic, I think it's a really good opportunity to talk about the concept and the context that we need to operate in. Because if you really think about the mission that we have in Global Strike Command, we really don't get a choice of picking the conditions. You expect us to conduct this mission under all conditions, and certainly a global pandemic is one of them. And I think at the heart and soul of that is an important word. I've said a few times before, when we consider the National Defense Strategy, the 3 words in there are compete, deter, win. And I've said, and I firmly believe to this day, that the most important of those 3 is really compete. You'd be inclined to think win, you'd be inclined to think deter, but I believe compete has to be the way we approach this. Let me just talk a little bit more about how we in this command have embraced that competitive mindset and why I think it's so important. Under COVID, we were anticipatory in what was going to happen because we knew the importance of our mission. And I'm here to tell you that our command hasn't just, muddled through. It's actually thrived. It's done some things that are just tremendous. Our bomber task forces continue to operate around the globe. I have direct feedback from our partners and allies, certainly our air component commanders and combatant commanders from around the planet, and the pivotal example that it's given all of us to reflect upon for dynamic force employment. The Secretary of Defense recently made some comments about how he saw this as the embodiment of dynamic force employment, and he underscored what we've passed along is that we've actually built readiness. Let me just say this here now, is that our bomber crews are now more ready today than they have ever been in the history of Global Strike Command, not just from the beginning of COVID, but from the beginning of this command. Our ICBMs have been just stalwarts in this whole endeavor, 24/7, just tremendous work by the team. They've never faltered. They have mastered discipline, self-isolation. They've done just brilliant work. I could not be more pleased with how they've operated under some difficult weather conditions and certainly under some difficult local conditions. We've kept our glory trips and our testing regime intact to keep that viable fleet in the field. Our modernization programs have gone just swimmingly. We've met our milestone B on time for the GBSD. That caught a lot of people by surprise, and even some more of the more minor upgrades to some of our platforms like the B1. Those are done on time, and we give a tremendous amount of credit here and now to our teammates in material command and certainly in the acquisition community. We launched more formally our Striker culture effort, and I think while we've done the thinking well over a year ago about what it took to go build this culture, COVID simply cemented that reality, and we're off and running with what we think is a very powerful shift in our culture. We've been able to lead more effectively, authentically, more collaboration both inside the command and outside the command. Innovation has flourished, and we're better connected by the airmen to the organization, the installation, and to the communities in a very significant way. We've held a women's leadership symposium. While virtual is very effective, and it had a lot of great feedback and participation throughout DoD. We launched StrikeWorks, which is our storefront to go run our innovation environment, and we've already seen some tremendous feedback already. We've really championed a big improvement in our quality of life, quality and mission effort. I'm proud to say that we are the vanguard for what we would call Services 2.0 for the Air Force Services Center, and what we've done with apps, with esports, with a lot of different things that are just really helpful. We've expanded the Wi-Fi capacity out in the field. Telehealth is the norm. We've mastered, I think, this idea of onboarding, because when you onboard new people in a COVID environment, you really have to be connected, and I'm very pleased with how we've done that. There's a host of things that I'm just proud to say we didn't slow down, we actually accelerated when we were in COVID. And at the heart of all of this, and if you want to talk about deterrence, you want to talk about competing, it is essentially about people. First and foremost, it is about people. And ladies and gentlemen, we have the Strikers, are an amazing group of folks. And I'm so proud of them. Officer, enlisted, the civilian, all came together to get a job done. The authenticity in the way we led and communicated, the innovation, all of those things were just tremendous. And I think at the heart of it is that each and every one of them, in some way or form, understand that they are the cornerstone of the security structure of the free world, and it cannot falter. And so the trust and the camaraderie that's been built in this crisis has only served to accelerate us. And when I think about this team going forward, I'm so pleased and I'm so optimistic about how they're going to handle things. I think they truly get, and this command truly gets, what we're up against. So let me just kind of take a moment to say what I think that really is. We're in a long-term strategic competition with two realist, autocratic nations with existential arsenals at their disposal. And they do not share our worldview about how things should operate. And we are in a competition with them, and it has got significant stakes. We take some of our thinking, and we've been helped by a great teammate of the command, Simon Sinek, the renowned author and thinker. We really are attaching ourselves to this idea of the infinite game that he talks about. I believe that it's profound, and I think it's real. Let me just spend a second to give you an example of what that really means. He talks about finite games and infinite games. Finite games, the greatest example, of course, would be baseball, right? Where there's a given number of innings, outs, there's rules, there's only two teams on the field, everybody understands what happens when the game is over. It's over, people walk away, there's no new players in the game, there's no changing agendas, there's no shift. It's a baseball game. With an infinite game, unlike a finite game, there are known and unknown players. They come and go from this particular competition with different equities, different rules. There's no defined end state. One of the points he makes is that you don't win in global politics. You don't win in business. Global politics continues. Business continues. And if you don't adapt yourself to be part of that, then you just stop playing the game and others continue to play it. A finite player tries to beat the competitors until they either run out of resources, time, or will. You can make the case that in the Cold War, our adversaries ran out of resources, They ran out of time, but I don't think ran out of will, because I think right now the only ones who truly stopped competing in that was the United States. Infinite players know that the competitors change, the rules change, they adapt to that. They know the environment and the context changes, and they can't cling to a context that they prefer and let that drive everything they do. As I said, there's no winning in an infinite game. There is the ability to continue to compete, and that, I think, is an important piece of how we need to approach things. We've done a lot of writing as a nation about the competition, right? And I believe it's really important to step back as we think about the national security strategy. We talk about the national defense strategy. We talk about the nuclear posture review. We talk about the national military strategy. They all highlight the strategic competition. And what I would really encourage us all to embrace is this is an infinite game competition, not a finite game. And the stakes actually in this game are existential. And we have to think about this thing with a different set of perspectives, and we cannot simply choose the context of how we approach that. Let me just also point out, and I think it's a follow-on conversation, we have to think about how we lead and operate as a Department of Defense, how we do this with an all-volunteer force. Because that actually has to change how you think and operate. And I made a comment earlier about the people and how good, healthy organizations are founded on trust. That, I think, ladies and gentlemen, has to be one of the entering arguments, not simply about the modernization or the philosophy or the policy. It's really about how we lead and how we approach that problem. And I can't emphasize that point enough, because that has to be how we approach this. Let me take just a quick second to talk about the competitors in this environment. I had the luxury of being in European Command as the deputy there, and I was the 3rd Air Force commander, working some of the combined air component command requirements for both Europe and Africa. I had a great exposure. I could see firsthand the competitive domain unfolding around us. I came in just over a year after the Crimea events with Russia, but you could see firsthand the coercion, the information campaigns, the corruption, certainly the threats, and all those challenges. And it was very real to me. And when you talk to our partners and allies, they all clearly understood what was happening there. And when I consider the Russians, you know, it's very clear that they are finishing a very robust nuclear modernization effort. They have newer systems, right? They have more improved exercises. They're larger, they're more complex, they're more snap to go give them the readiness. There are veiled nuclear threats to the NATO teammates, and certainly when I consider all the things that they have in their nuclear arsenal, the number of things that now fall outside of arms control agreements, it's very troubling. We're only a small part, a fraction of their arsenal falls within an agreement, where most of our arsenal falls inside that agreement. That's a pretty tenuous position. And certainly how that is viewed in the minds of our partners and allies, even if it's not a very public conversation, I think if they're candid in person, they'll tell you of their real concerns. Probably the most disconcerting development in all of this, of course, is China. You know, a full spectrum challenge to all of us. Their military expansion, the state-run institutions. You know, this is not my comment, not my term, but I do echo it. I do believe the One Belt, One Road approach is really just 21st century colonialism, and certainly how they behave around the planet. So when we consider our partners and allies, as we watch certainly the recent language from NATO, they have to contend now with the Chinese reality, and I think that's an important acknowledgement. They've unabashedly stolen from us as the United States. They just don't have the same regards for intellectual property. Naturally, it's the kind of thing you do to compete. And I think it's really estimated that the IP theft accounts for about $600 billion annually in losses to the United States. Well, that's non-trivial. They're in our academic systems, right? So when we think about the 1 million, foreign nationals that are in our academic institutions, which I think is a great thing, a third of them are from China. And that's non-trivial, where a decade ago, only about 81,000 of them were Chinese. It's a clear assessment from our intel community that the Chinese are exploiting our open society in many, many ways. And there's a handful of business people that I know will be very candid with me about the challenges that they face, not simply from a business standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, from the Chinese involvement in our country. Their theory of victory is very different. And I think you have to embrace that reality of how they approach it. They do, I think, understand the total competitive nature of conflict going forward. It's more than just a collection of capabilities. I think we've taught them pretty well. They've paid very close attention to us. In fact, their writing does reinforce that particular point. It's really not about how many weapons you have, right? It's really about how these systems compete and how you leverage advantages against vulnerabilities and how they get that particular position in the strategic environment. My position in the past is that they're actually playing chess, not checkers. And I think that when you consider conflict with them, you now have to embrace the reality that we've never fought a nuclear armed adversary, and we've chosen every conflict, to start every conflict since Korea, on our own terms. So when we think about competition with China, particularly in the Pacific, we have to inform that by the fact that they are a nuclear armed adversary, that they have multi-domain threats, and that they understand the full nature of the competitive space. I think it's also disconcerting to those who watch China is the pace that they're keeping. As I said, they're an autocratic nation, and they don't have to ask anybody. They don't have to deal with media or what the citizens of China think. They simply do what they think they need to do. And I think at the end of the day, we have to, and this is probably one of the most profound realities that we all have to come to grips with. And one of the things that I alluded to earlier in my opening remarks is that I believe firmly that the Chinese have departed from a minimalist nuclear deterrent approach. You know, going into 2020, I believe that that's where they were going to operate, and I believe that we had latitude to operate with that as a contextual reality. You've heard some of our senior leaders say publicly that, you know, the Chinese will at least double their nuclear arsenal by the end of the decade. Most people glean the double as the most important word in that conversation. I will tell you the most important words are at least. If I can emphasize one key point, it is the at least reality. And so when we consider now that we have a Russian competitor where only a portion of their arsenal is fully modernized and covered by a treaty, we have a Chinese competitor where none of their arsenal is covered by a treaty, and certainly their ambition to match us as a nuclear near peer in the future. We have to reconcile that contextual reality very differently than we've done. We don't have the luxury of picking our context, and I think that's really important. When I come back to where academia and the think tanks really embrace this, it's not about whether that's going to happen, it's the fact that it has. It's happening, and then how do we deal with it? We need the brightest minds in America to reconcile that particular reality. I firmly believe we're at that spot now when you consider the real facts in front of us. The burden of proof on whether or not we need to modernize our triad in light of the Chinese, that's not on me anymore. That's actually on, the burden of proof really rests on those who think we can do something differently in light of all those contextual realities. And as I said again, you don't get to pick your context. That context is now unequivocally given to us, and we have to think accordingly. We are embracing the competitive mindset. I've given you some examples, but let me just say, if these things are real and they're true, and I do believe they are, then we do need to have a different approach to how we do business. We need more advanced thinking on what it means to be truly competitive. Certainly the entire system needs to think about this. I'm glad to see Chief Brown's product recently on Accelerate, Change, or Lose. You are not going to find a stauncher advocate for that reality. You're not going to find a more engaged and committed teammate on that effort. I believe he is absolutely right. And if we don't accelerate change, we are going to lose, and there are significant consequences to that. Let me give you some examples. You know, I know the chief is talking about, you know, eliminating the bureaucracy and making some tough choices. I think, let's give me some context. I think the competitive operations from the Global Strike Command, the air component to Strategic Command's perspective is how we really lean into connecting the Joint All-Domain Command and Control and the Advanced Battle Management System with NC2 over Assured Comms. If you consider how our would-be adversaries will operate in a multi-domain environment, if you consider the technology at play, if you consider what we really require to do, you'll see that there is really no choice but to embrace many of these concepts. Some may argue that you can fight disconnected from your senior leader, command and control in a conventional conflict. There's no version of that with a nuclear arsenal that works. You absolutely have to stay connected to the national leadership so that it is viable and effective. And that's a pivotal issue, and I believe we need to throw tremendous time and energy, not just into NC2 over Assured Comms, but making the broader JADC2 ABMS concept a reality. We are working hard as the air component to U.S. Strategic Command to give all of our teammates more relevant operational concepts, challenging our alert assumptions, challenging our generation assumptions, challenging some of the things that we've done from our concepts for reconstitution, certainly how we're challenging the way we think about bomber task forces and how we move around. We've challenged many of the old assumptions about security and risk. And certainly you see a lot of folks in this narrative who rightfully call forward the concerns of security with things that existed in the past, but now they actually have to be blended with more significant factors. And operational commanders need to be able to effectively balance the risk to mission, risk to force with risk to policy. And those are important comments that I think need to prevail. And I think if we can do this in a collaborative team fashion, I think we'll be successful. Here's just an example. The weapons generation facility we proposed building here at Barksdale is a great example where as we applied all the rules and all the limitations under all the different governing documents, it was about a $750 million option that was marginally more secure and capable. We brought a collaborative team of all the stakeholders together. We challenged some assumptions. We worked together. We had a shared mental model of what we wanted to get done. We now have a solution that's about a third the cost and significantly more secure, significantly more effective. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's the kind of innovation and collaboration that's going to deliver more effective, more affordable solutions. That kind of thinking has allowed this command to pull several billion in investment in modernization off the table, because we cannot just do this by spending our way out of it. We have to be very smart and effective in what we do. Our bomber task forces have been superb, and folks, you're seeing version 1.0. We're on our way to a much more effective capability. You've seen some of the work we've done with the external carriage of cruise missiles on the B-1. That's just the harbinger of things that we're going to do with cruise missiles for all of our bombers, and certainly the ability to bring in hypersonics and then to combine that with more agile bomber task forces. We think that that is an important contribution to our partners and allies and to each of the theaters. We've seen tremendous support of our bomber task forces with our partners and allies. We were able to fly over every NATO country in one of our previous exercises. And my conversation with General Todd Walters, the SACEUR, he is deeply appreciative and said it has had a tremendous impact on that alliance and a very strong signal. And I know for a fact that it's driving our Russian competitors crazy. And I'm all for that when it's appropriate. I believe as well in the innovation from industry, right? So we have a few things that we're bringing on, a little more mainstream, big projects for innovation where we're having pitches on things like how we do some of our command and control and alerting. And I've seen some very promising results. We have some local partners. I can always follow up later, but you know, it's a collection of great ideas at the grassroots level of our airmen who are looking for smarter ways to optimize how they're doing things. And we've created that ecosystem for them to be able to thrive, but we're also systematically as a command looking for those gaps and seams that we know aren't going to deliver in time and finding really smart ways to get after some of those things. So I'm really pleased with how that's coming together. Certainly our acquisition process and how we've done things. I can't say enough about our acquisition teammates and our material command teammates. The list of things we have been able to accomplish as a team this year by itself would be eye-watering if you cut it in half. The fact that we did all that we did is superb, and the fact that we did it all under COVID is just, it's breathtaking, and it's phenomenal. Our approach to acquisition for our major programs, the GBSD, the B-21, the helicopter, the cruise missile, and on modular designs, owning the tech baseline, mature technologies, open structures for us to go and really effectively and rapidly modify, that has allowed us to keep our requirements incredibly stable and to field on time. And certainly when you back up some of these with the digital engineering and some of the agile software development that I would call now the Defense Department standard, you can now see where the models that begin to talk about costing, they no longer actually are accurate. So some of the numbers you're seeing being reported on the GBSD publicly, they reflect an old structure and old models. And even those who have run them will acknowledge that there is some significant slippage in how they estimate because they've never seen anything this effective before. And so I think at the end of the day, as time goes on, we'll prove out that this is a much more effective and affordable and intelligent way to approach things. Hypersonics, I've talked about that. I am absolutely committed to bringing hypersonic weapons to our long-range strike platforms. It's got to be elemental to how we operate in the future, and it's one of those things I believe that the entire Department of Defense acknowledges, and I believe our would-be adversaries are very intimidated by. Let's see, for our B-21 phenomenal system, and when you consider the Advanced Battle Management System and JADC2, these things are one and the same for the B-21 and our ability to do remarkable things. Let me just say right here and now, the B-21 is not simply an advanced version of the B-2. It's fundamentally different, and it has a significant implication to how we modernize and compete in the future. We've been able to accelerate the LRSO, the new cruise missile, the long-range standoff missile. We can shorten the milestone B decision, and what we're looking for is the help from Congress, not just to be on time, but to actually accelerate an entire year, and I'm pretty pleased with where that's going. I believe you have to have a competitive triad, not simply because of how you've acquired it, because you do need to adapt those capabilities and attributes to it to keep it modernized and keep it relevant to deal with what's really an anti-access area denial type of approach by our adversaries. Things have to remain survivable or they don't deter. And there's not really a version of bringing the old systems that we have now into the 2020 timeframe and beyond and believe that we can sustain that survivability and that effectiveness. So I've talked about a lot of these things here just kind of in its one positive context, and I know that since we are not able to be there in person and I would field questions, let me hit a shot group, I think, of some points that might answer a lot of questions. And so I'm just going to call this busting the myths, right? Because I think a lot of people can come up with a number of questions that would really fall squarely into some of these myths. The context of the American triad lives in the context of a now fully declared Chinese triad. The Chinese have said publicly they have a triad, and I've talked about the arc of that. A fully modernized Russian triad, and it absolutely lives in the minds of our partners and allies. There is an incredibly important extended deterrence dimension to this, right? So as our teammates in Europe and in the Pacific think through their future, their ability to reflect upon the extended deterrence provided to them by the American triad is an important part of their strategic calculus. We can't on our own, just in isolation or unilaterally, change that equation and be responsible partners and allies. Because there's many things that we talk about for attributes, but the visible dimension of a triad, an element of it that would be committed to a regional concern, has to be a visible and obvious thing that we can remind our partners and allies, and certainly our would-be adversaries, that it's there. So if we're really serious about counterproliferation, we need to be serious about a modern U.S. triad. I think when we talk about where we're going, I believe Simon Sinek talked about three tensions. He'll call it Cold War 2.0, but the tensions that he said were out there, it began, if you think through the Cold War with the Soviet Union, there was an economic tension, and that's, I think, beyond debate. There's an ideological tension that played out, time and again all over the planet with proxies and other conflicts. But there's certainly, and what underwrote the entire thing was that there was a nuclear tension. I contend now that you have an ideological tension with the Chinese. I don't believe the American people were fans of what happened in Hong Kong. And certainly any autocratic regime can change policy overnight and be an unpredictable player. I believe clearly there is an economic tension that's at play. Free access to markets, what they're doing with the One Belt, One Road, and how those things are operating in some of our partners and allies or people that we regularly operate with. And now I believe unequivocally there's a nuclear tension that's at play. So when we think about all those realities, we can't just pick our own context. We have to embrace that reality. And the analogy I offer to some is that if you think that you can pick your own context, then I'd simply tell them to go to a crosswalk in New York City. And if you've ever been to New York City, you'll know that not only do the cars not actually honor the crosswalks, the people and the pedestrians don't actually honor the signs or the signals. But if you philosophically believe you have every right to walk through that crosswalk when the light comes on, then I challenge you to close your eyes and simply walk through that crosswalk. Philosophically, you have every right to do that. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, how really interesting that outcome would be. Because while you may be philosophically right, there's a good chance you would be physically dead. And so when we think about this particular triad and what's happening here, ladies and gentlemen, we do not have the luxury of picking our own context. There's a myth out there that nukes are less relevant. My point is, you can take that position, but the Russians and the Chinese are taking a very different position on that particular front. As I said, they've fully modernized in Russia, and they've added some things. The Chinese, they have their foot on the gas, and they intend to match us. This is not something that we are trying to drive. This is something we are trying to accommodate. And certainly as that happens, quietly, methodically, we have to have the conversations with our partners and allies. I do believe where we have been successful as a nation and as alliances and the free-thinking people, where modernization and arms control go together in this, then we've been very effective. We don't have the luxury of leaning on one or the other. There has to be a way to get this conversation to happen in the right way that gives us a responsible set of solutions for the planet. And again, we do have a different context to have that dialogue. Myth number 2, triad versus a monad or a dyad. We can have the debate, but I believe one of the brightest military mind of our generation is former General Mattis. He came into the job believing that he could provide the deterrent with a dyad, and he said that I cannot solve the deterrent equation reducing from the triad. And there are those who've picked some secretaries of defense in the past as staunch allies or advocates for minimal nuclear weapons. But the reality is that was one Secretary of Defense many years ago. The context has changed, and there's been an entire string of Secretaries of Defense who validate that, even under the previous administration. The truth be told, that the handful of subs do not offer the same attributes. You can see clearly that really changes the targeting concept for would-be adversaries. It lets them be effective without any true investment. Certainly the ability to let an enemy adversary target non-military targets and have the same effect, as opposed to letting them target our military resources, particularly our ICBMs in the upper Midwest. I would rather see them shoot at one of our ICBM silos in North Dakota or Montana than I would Chicago or St. Louis. And I believe that's got to be part of the thinking that goes into this. Truth be told, I said that this is a context that absolutely lives in the context of a modernized Russian triad and a complete Chinese triad, and it has to happen in that way. The third one is unauthorized launch. I struggle with this one. And for those of you who truly understand the process, I'm just going to say it, and I don't want to be crass about it, but this is actually laughable when you truly understand this is not Hollywood. While that may make for an interesting theme for a Hollywood movie, a suspense, maybe a James Bond movie or something like that, it's not reality. And if you truly understand the professionals that are on the watch every single day, and you know how they operate, you know procedurally and physically how impossible this is, you should sleep well at night knowing that we are not on some hair trigger, and that there's not some unauthorized launch reality that's in play here. Nuclear modernization is an arms race. I really struggle with this comment. I am confused by it, actually, when I consider the fact that all the things that I've just said about the Russians and the Chinese, all we are talking about here in DoD is replacing the systems, replacing the outcome with the long-range strike standoff weapon, replacing the B-20, the B-2, and the B-61 with newer versions of the B-21 and the B-61. We're talking about replacing the Minuteman III with the GBSD, right? And so at the end of the day, this is not an increase in capability. It's ensuring that the cornerstone of the security structure of the free world remains viable and effective and affordable. And so at the end of the day, the arms race really, if it's going on somewhere else. It's not with us. I hear the comment too that modernization will cost too much. Back in the 60s, it was 17% of the DoD budget. When we go into the Reagan buildup, it was 10%. And right now, it's we estimate that it's 6.4%. So it's actually going down in terms of what it requires. And I don't believe that we've actually baked in the modernization effectiveness or the sustainability. Let me just give you one example. When I consider the GBSD, we're talking about a 2/3 reduction in the number of times I have to run a convoy. I'm talking about a 2/3 reduction in the number of times I have to penetrate a site. I'm talking about the ability to rapidly add new capabilities or to keep things modernized. And there's great opportunities with a modular system now where we can then team with the Navy to do things collectively in a very effective way. So at the end of the day, it's not that it's going to cost too much. And I do believe it is the cornerstone of the security structure of the free world, and you have to continue with this particular effort. If you do consider the price tag of keeping an older fleet in the ground, and when you reconcile the threats and the challenges, you would be taken aback by the price tag of what it would take to modify and to change these systems to be the effective ones that we need. And that goes to the second one, is that there's no need to modernize. You can continue using the old. There's just no version of me adding the right kinds of capabilities to the Minuteman III or to any of the other platforms to make them effective. Our enemies have thought through this and how to beat these systems and how they're approaching this with missile defense and anti-access and area denial. We are not on an affordable path for modernization and sustainment and relevance. And ladies and gentlemen, if it's not relevant, it doesn't deter. And that actually is a bigger waste of money. The last one I'd like to talk to is the fact that you can't innovate in the nuclear enterprise. And I kind of dealt with that when I got here, and there are those who felt that the requirements are too rigid. Let me just tell you, there's a lot of bureaucracy out there that just needs to be brought forward into the reality of the 21st century. We're having success in those areas. Certainly there's things that are written in blood, things that are just sacrosanct, but there's a significant amount of optimization and improvement that can be done. I'm seeing some just really common sense steps by our teammates out there in the ICBM field to bring in more relevant capabilities than some of the older things. And so, as I think through the example I gave you earlier about the weapons generation facility, how you can collaborate across the enterprise and how you can think through these things more appropriately, where our success has been is where we brought in our external teammates to be part of the solution set. And I think we can actually become much, much more relevant, much more safe, much more secure, and absolutely much more affordable. I do believe we need to unleash the incredible talent of our young airmen out there. When we think about this all-volunteer force and we think about the youth of today, they are just They are just amazing people. And they have so much of a desire to be part of something bigger than themselves, and there's a great buy-in to what's going on. And I think when we let the young people bring in the new technology or the technological answers, then I think we have some great opportunities. And I just am so pleased with the arc of where we've gone from an innovation standpoint. I'm sure there's other questions. I would love to be able to talk to those, but let me just wrap this up. Let me just recap. I think we're at a pivotal time, a very pivotal time. And this really transcends any political ideologies. It transcends whoever was in office is going to be in office. This is an apolitical point, is that we absolutely need to focus our time and energy on solving the problem that really is in front of us, and that we can't just pick our context. There is a very clear need to accelerate change in this competitive environment. We're in a great power competition that's infinite in its nature, and our competitors continue to move, and they have tremendous momentum. And certainly when we think about, what our brightest minds can bring to the table, we've really got to think about how we do this in an affordable, sustainable, inclusive process with our partners and allies, because that's one clear advantage that we have over anybody else. I had one of my fellow general officers relay to me as he was talking to a Chinese officer. And the Chinese officer said, "Why do you guys have allies?" Because it's purely transactional from their perspective. We see allies and partners as a way of life, and certainly how we work together across the globe to do things smart. We've got to have a great teamwork approach here. At the end of the day, I believe we have a great plan. I'm not simply trying to pine back to the old SAC days. Trust me, those are days that I don't want to bring back. This is not some four-star general who wants to bring back SAC or bring back the Cold War. I think that those realities have come to us, and we have to take the new techniques to go take those on. And I believe you should be very confident at the plan that's in place in terms of our modernization, the team we have on the field, and certainly how we're going to approach this problem. Thank you very much.